They stood beside the open grave, wrapped in their expensive designer black wool coats, looking like mourners from a daytime soap opera. The dirt over my grandfather's casket had not even been settled yet. The priest was barely out of earshot, walking back toward the small stone church. I was freezing, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my dark slacks, staring at the mahogany box that held the only person in the world who had ever truly loved me. And right there, with the scent of turned earth and winter pine heavy in the air, my mother Daphne decided it was the perfect time to strike. She did not offer me a hug. She did not shed a single tear for the man we had just buried. Instead, she adjusted her oversized veil, pulled a crisp white envelope from her leather handbag, and shoved it toward my chest. Her voice was sharp, loud enough for the lingering, wealthy guests to hear, dripping with a sickeningly sweet fake sympathy. "Marin, darling," she said, sighing as if I were a burden she was graciously carrying. "We appreciate the little hobby shop you ran out of Dad's old sheds. It kept him entertained in his final years. But the adults need to cash out now. I have a buyer for the land. You have 30 days to pack up your junk and vacate the premises. Do not make this difficult. 30 days. To pack up 9 years of my blood, my sweat, and my tears." They were evicting me at a funeral. They were standing over a fresh grave, already counting the millions they thought they were about to steal from the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. My sister Sutton stood behind her, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, already whispering to our father Alistair about what kind of luxury sports car she was going to buy with her cut of the inheritance. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally crushed the scapegoat daughter, the invisible workhorse they had spent decades grinding into the dirt. They expected me to break down. They expected me to cry, to beg, to throw a tantrum so they could point and say I was the unstable one. I did none of those things. I just looked at the crisp white envelope. I looked at the 3 of them, these emotional vampires who shared my DNA. And then, slowly, a wide, terrifying smile spread across my face. But to understand why I smiled when my mother handed me an eviction notice, you have to understand the empire she was trying to steal. You have to understand the smell of old wood, the bite of steel wire, and the exact moment I realized my family was a disease I had to cure myself of. My mornings usually start long before the sun even considers rising. By 4 in the morning, the air in my workshop is freezing, carrying the sharp, unmistakable scent of aged mahogany, chemical varnishes, and decades-old dust. I own Gideon and Marin Grand Pianos, a premier restoration facility for the most elite, rare, and historically significant musical instruments in the country. We do not just fix pianos. We resurrect them. We take shattered, water-damaged, neglected hulks of wood and turn them back into million-dollar masterpieces. It is brutal work. Most people look at a grand piano and see elegance. They see high society. They see delicate fingers gliding over ivory keys in massive concert halls. I see the reality. I see the 230 strings, pulling with the combined tension of over 20 tons. I know what it feels like when one of those steel strings snaps during tuning and whips past your face fast enough to take out an eye. My hands are not delicate. My palms are a landscape of thick calluses and pale white scars. My fingernails are permanently stained dark brown from heavy wood stains and French polish. I have spent the last 9 years carrying cast iron plates that weigh hundreds of pounds, breathing in sawdust until my lungs burned, and working until my vision blurred. I built this sanctuary with splintered fingers and a stubborn, fierce refusal to ever be someone's stepping stone again. The people who visit my massive, temperature-controlled facility see the success. They see the wealthy clients flying in from out of state. They see the waiting list that stretches out 3 years. They assume I inherited a thriving family legacy. They assume I grew up privileged and supported. They have no idea that my family was the very thing I had to escape just to survive. They do not know that every swing of a hammer, every hour spent sanding a soundboard until my arm shook, was fueled by a deep, burning rage. Out here, the wood does not lie. Wood does not play favorites. If you treat it right, it sings. If you force it, it cracks. It makes sense. It follows rules. My family never followed rules. Growing up, my house was a toxic theater production, and my mother Daphne was the ruthless, image-obsessed director. There was only ever one star of the show, and that was my younger sister Sutton. My father Alistair was merely a stagehand, a weak, spineless man who kept his head down, agreed with everything Daphne said, and faded into the wallpaper to avoid becoming a target. And me? I was the prop. I was the understudy. I was the invisible problem solver who was only acknowledged when something needed to be fixed, cleaned, or paid for. In my family, being called the strong one was not a compliment. It was a life sentence. It meant you were expected to require zero maintenance, zero affection, and zero resources. It meant your achievements were ignored because they were expected, while Sutton's most basic daily functions were celebrated like she had just cured a rare disease. Sutton was delicate. Sutton was sensitive. Sutton had severe anxiety. Sutton needed our unwavering support. Those were the mantras repeated in our house until they became the unquestionable laws of physics. If you have ever been the scapegoat in a narcissistic family structure, you know the exact, bitter flavor of this humiliation. You know what it feels like to have your entire existence minimized so another person can take up all the oxygen in the room. But how did it get so bad that they thought they could steal my entire life's work? To answer that, we have to go back to the moment the blindfold was ripped off. I call my memory the Museum of Pain. It is a vast, cold place in my mind where I keep the artifacts of my childhood. If you walk through it, you will see 1,000 tiny betrayals. You will see the time I worked a summer job to buy myself a decent winter coat, only for Daphne to give it to Sutton because Sutton felt cold more deeply than I did. You will see the high school graduation where my parents left early because Sutton had a minor headache and needed a dark room. But the centerpiece of this museum, the defining exhibit that taught me exactly where I stood, happened when I was 12 years old. I had spent 3 grueling months teaching myself to play a complex classical sonata for the regional youth piano competition. We had a beat-up upright piano in the basement that sounded like tin cans crashing together, but I loved it. I practiced in the damp, freezing basement for hours every night, wrapping myself in blankets, trying to hit the keys softly so I would not disturb Daphne's evening television shows. I did not have a fancy instructor. I had library books and sheer, desperate determination. The day of the competition, I played better than I ever had in my life. The music flowed out of me, a desperate plea to be seen, to be heard, to matter. When they announced the winners, my name was called first. I won first place. They handed me a blue ribbon and a cheap plastic trophy shaped like a treble clef. I was so proud my chest actually ached. My parents had promised to pick me up after the ceremony and take me out for a celebratory pizza. I stood on the front steps of the community center, holding my trophy tight against my jacket. It was snowing. Not the pretty, fluffy snow, but the wet, heavy sleet that soaks right through your clothes and freezes your skin. I waited 1 hour. Then 2 hours. The parking lot emptied out. The sky turned a dark, bruised purple. The community center doors locked behind me. The cold seeped into my bones, making my teeth chatter violently. Finally, the night janitor spotted me shivering under a broken streetlight and let me use the office phone to call home. Daphne answered on the 5th ring, sounding intensely annoyed. When I asked where they were, she let out a heavy, aggrieved sigh. "Marin, we cannot deal with your little piano thing right now," she snapped. I asked what was wrong. Sutton just went through a terrible ordeal. She broke her nail down to the quick at the salon. It was bleeding, Marin. She is hyperventilating. We had to take her to get a calming smoothie, and now we are sitting with her in the dark so she can regulate her nervous system. You are strong. You know the way. You can walk the 3 miles home. She hung up. The click of the receiver echoed in my ear. I stood in the janitor's office, staring at the phone. My sister broke a fingernail. That was the emergency. That was the catastrophic event that superseded my achievement, my safety, and my worth as a human being. I walked the 3 miles home in the freezing sleet. I carried my plastic trophy in numb, frozen hands. When I finally pushed the front door open, dripping wet, shivering so hard I could barely stand, the house was warm. I walked into the living room. Daphne, Alistair, and Sutton were sitting on the couch, laughing at a comedy movie on the television. Sutton had a tiny bandage on her pinky finger. Nobody looked up. Nobody asked about the competition. Nobody asked why my lips were blue. I walked quietly down the hall to my bedroom, threw the plastic trophy directly into the trash can, and crawled into bed with my wet clothes on. That was the night I learned to shrink. I learned that my pain was invisible and my success was an inconvenience. I stopped asking them to show up for me. I stopped expecting them to be parents. By the time I reached my early 20s, I was a ghost in my own life. I lived in a tiny rented room on the bad side of town. I worked 2 grueling jobs, one at a hardware store loading heavy bags of cement, and another doing late-night data entry. I saved every single penny. I paid for my own food, my own clothes, my own survival. I mistakenly thought that distance and extreme independence would fix the dynamic. I thought if I asked them for nothing, no money, no help, no favors, they might eventually respect me. I thought they might occasionally offer a small scrap of normal family affection. A phone call just to say hello. A birthday wish. A single, fleeting moment where the spotlight drifted my way. I was profoundly wrong. Toxic families do not reward independence. They resent it. They view your ability to survive without them as a direct, personal insult. They hate that you do not need them, while simultaneously demanding that you remain available to serve the golden child whenever they snap their fingers. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most brutal, humiliating way possible. I had survived 25 years of canceled plans, ignored milestones, and silent rejections. I had built a fortress of low expectations. But I had no idea that my 20th birthday would be the match that burned the entire bridge straight to the ground. For my 20th birthday, I decided to do something I had never dared to do before. I decided to matter. A quarter of a century is a major milestone. I had spent years watching my coworkers and friends celebrate their birthdays with lavish parties, surrounded by families who cheered for them. I wanted just one night where I was the center of attention. I wanted one night where we sat around a table and pretended to be a normal, loving family. I had been working extra double shifts at the hardware store, lifting boxes until my back screamed, and hoarding my data entry paychecks. Over 6 months, I saved up exactly $5,000. To me, at that time, it was an unimaginable fortune. It was freedom money. But I wanted to use it to buy a memory. I went to the Grand Symphony Hall downtown. It was an opulent, historic building with sweeping marble staircases, gold leaf ceilings, and thick velvet curtains. They had a private VIP reception room overlooking the city's skyline that they rented out for elite events. I walked in wearing my cheap work boots and a faded jacket, and I placed $5,000 in cash on the manager's desk. I booked the room, a catered dinner, and a custom banner. I invited my parents, Sutton, and a few close coworkers. I did not ask Daphne or Alistair to pay for a single napkin. I did not ask them to organize, plan, or lift a finger. All I asked, the only thing I requested, was that they put on nice clothes and show up at 7 in the evening on a Saturday to eat a free luxury meal and acknowledge that I had been alive for 25 years. I drove to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon to deliver the heavy, gold-embossed invitations in person. I stood in the pristine kitchen. Daphne was obsessively polishing the granite countertops. Alistair was reading a golf magazine. Sutton was slumped at the kitchen island, scrolling endlessly on her phone, loudly complaining about how her part-time job as a receptionist was causing her severe emotional burnout. I placed the invitations on the counter. I told them about the symphony hall. I told them the time. I told them the deposit was already fully paid. Daphne did not even look up from her polishing cloth. She stared at a smudge on the granite. The symphony hall? That is a very stuffy environment, Marin. You know Sutton gets claustrophobic in rooms with heavy drapes. And classical music gives her migraines. But I suppose we can make a brief appearance. It was not a congratulations. It was not an enthusiastic yes. But it was a yes. For the next 3 days, I made a fatal mistake. I let myself feel hope. It is a dangerous, intoxicating drug for a scapegoat child. I went to a boutique and bought a beautiful, dark green evening gown that made me feel like royalty. I bought expensive shoes. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my cheap apartment, imagining the clinking of crystal glasses. I imagined Alistair making a toast. I imagined Daphne smiling at me with genuine pride. I imagined Sutton just being quiet for one single evening. I built a beautiful, fragile glass castle in my mind. The illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces on Thursday afternoon. I was at the hardware store, carrying a heavy box of iron nails, when my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I set the box down and checked the screen. It was the events manager from the Symphony Hall. I answered, expecting a routine question about the menu. The manager sounded bright and cheerful. "Hi, Marin. I am just calling to confirm the final changes to your reservation for this Saturday night. We have updated the custom banner, and we will apply the $5,000 deposit toward the premium champagne tower as requested." I froze. The aisle of the hardware store seemed to tilt sideways. The ambient noise of the store faded into a loud, ringing static in my ears. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "I am sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What changes? What banner?" The manager paused. Her cheerful tone faltered, replaced by professional confusion. "Your mother, Daphne, called about an hour ago. She said there was a sudden change of plans. She asked us to change the custom banner from 'Happy 25th Birthday Marin' to 'Congratulations Sutton on your brave recovery.' She also said you were generously donating your entire deposit to upgrade the bar to serve premium vintage champagne for the family toast." A cold, heavy numbness spread from my chest outward, freezing the blood in my veins. I could not breathe. My lungs forgot how to pull in air. They were not just canceling on me. Canceling would have been normal. Canceling would have been par for the course. This was something entirely different. They were hijacking my event. They were stealing the luxury room I booked. They were taking the $5,000 I saved with my own calloused, blistered hands, money I earned lifting cement and typing until my fingers bled, to throw a lavish party for my sister. They were erasing me from my own birthday. I thanked the manager in a hollow, robotic voice. I hung up the phone. I did not clock out. I did not tell my boss I was leaving. I walked straight out the front doors of the hardware store, got into my beat-up car and drove to my parents' house in a blind, silent blur. I pushed the heavy oak front door open without knocking. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of expensive vanilla candles. I walked straight into the kitchen. Daphne was sitting at the island, writing out elegant place cards with a calligraphy pen. Sutton was sitting across from her, holding up a mirror, testing out different shades of expensive lip gloss. I stood in the doorway. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I just stared at them, letting the sheer, unadulterated evil of the situation wash over me. "Why?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. "Why did you call the Symphony Hall, Daphne?" Daphne sighed, delicately setting down her pen. She turned to me and gave me that patronizing, pitying look she always used right before she did something unforgivably cruel. "Marin, please, do not make a scene and ruin the energy in this house," she said smoothly. Sutton just went through a devastating breakup. The boy she was seeing for 3 weeks ended things abruptly. She is emotionally shattered. Her self-esteem is in ruins. She needs a win right now. We thought, since you already had the beautiful room booked and paid for, it would be the perfect venue to lift her spirits and show her she is loved. She waved her hand dismissively. "You are turning 25. It is just a number. It is not a big deal. You are the strong one, Marin. You do not need a fancy dinner and people fawning over you. Your sister needs this." I shifted my gaze to Sutton. She pouted her lips in her compact mirror, then looked up at me with wide, fake, innocent doe eyes. "Come on, Marin," Sutton whined, her voice dripping with artificial fragility. "Can you not just be selfless and let me have this one day? I am so fragile right now. My heart is literally in pieces. I cannot handle any of your negative energy or jealousy today." I looked from my sister to my mother. Then I looked at Alistair, my father, who was standing by the refrigerator. He was holding a jar of mustard, staring intently at the nutrition label, pretending he was suddenly deaf and blind. He would not even meet my eyes. He was letting them steal my life, just so he wouldn't have to hear Daphne complain. In that exact moment, standing in that pristine kitchen, a massive, terrifying clarity washed over me. It was like waking up from a 25-year coma. I had spent my entire life trying to fill a cup that had a massive hole in the bottom. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much money I saved, no matter how small I made myself, I would never be a daughter to them. I would never be a human being with feelings and needs. I was just a resource. I was a battery for them to drain so Sutton could shine. I did not cry. My eyes were completely dry. A profound, chilling calm settled over my mind. "You're right," I said softly. "I am the strong one. Enjoy the champagne." I turned around and walked out the door. I did not slam it. I let it click shut quietly behind me. I got into my car and immediately called the Symphony Hall manager back. My voice was steady and hard as steel. "There has been a severe misunderstanding," I told the manager. "I am the one who signed the contract. I am canceling the entire reservation. Everything. The food, the room, the drinks. Cancel it all." The manager stammered, "But Marin, if you cancel this close to the date, the contract states you forfeit the entire $5,000 deposit. We cannot refund you." "I do not care," I replied. "Keep the $5,000 as a cancellation fee. Keep it all. Just ensure that the room is legally released, the doors are locked, and if my mother or sister show up on Saturday, they are denied entry by security." "Understood," the manager said quietly. It was the best $5,000 I ever spent. I paid $5,000 to lock them out of the luxury they tried to steal from me. I paid $5,000 to watch their glass castle shatter. I drove back to my tiny rented room. I pulled a canvas duffel bag from the closet and started packing. 2 pairs of heavy denim jeans, thick boots, a handful of flannel shirts, and the small metal cash box I kept hidden under my mattress. I packed like a ghost preparing to leave a haunted house. I left the beautiful green gown hanging in the closet. I didn't need it anymore. I did not know exactly what I was going to do or how I was going to survive. I only knew I had to drive north. Hours north, past the city lights, past the sprawling suburbs, up into the deep, freezing woods and the cold lakes. Up to the only person who had ever looked at me like I was a real person. My grandfather, Gideon. I threw my bag into the passenger seat, turned the key in the ignition, and drove into the dark. I blocked Daphne's number. I blocked Alistair. I blocked Sutton. I severed the cord completely. What I did not know then, as I drove through the black pine forests, was that I was not just running away. I was driving toward a war that would take 9 years to win. They wanted me to be the strong one. They wanted me to be a machine. Well, they were about to find out exactly how terrifying my strength could be when it was finally aimed in their direction. The drive north was an endless blur of black trees, icy roads, and heavy silence. Sometime around midnight, the heater in my beat-up sedan finally gave out, and the bitter winter chill seeped directly into my bones. But I did not care. For the first time in my entire existence, I was moving forward without dragging the suffocating, dead weight of my family's expectations behind me. I pulled onto the gravel driveway of Gideon's piano restoration workshop at 2 in the morning. My headlights swept across the property, and my heart sank. It was worse than I remembered. The main workshop building was leaning heavily to one side. The paint on the office cabin was peeling off in long, gray, dead strips. The yard was choked with dead weeds and rusted piano frames that looked like the ribcages of giant, ancient beasts. It looked like a graveyard for forgotten music. The porch light flickered on. The front door of the small cabin opened, and a silhouette stepped out into the freezing night. It was my grandfather, Gideon. He was 70 years old, wrapped in a faded plaid robe, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He did not ask why I was there in the middle of the night. He did not ask why I was shivering or why my eyes looked so hollow. He just shuffled down the wooden steps, wrapped a thick, rough arm around my shoulders, and guided me inside into the warmth. There was a pot of black coffee keeping warm on the stove. He poured me a mug, sat across from me at the scarred wooden kitchen table, and watched me in silence. When I finally thawed out enough to speak, I looked down at my scarred hands. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I have nothing. I canceled my own birthday. I locked them out. I left them. I do not think I can ever go back." He let out a long, slow breath. His eyes, the color of old steel, met mine. "Good," he said, his voice a deep, rough rumble. "The only mistake you made was waiting this long to do it. You stay here as long as you need. I have more broken pianos than money and more work than time. You can hide here or you can build here. Up to you." I slept for 14 hours straight on the lumpy sofa in his spare room. When I woke up, the sun was high, casting long shadows across the yard. I could hear the faint, agonizing sound of someone trying to stretch a bass string coming from the main workshop. I walked into the small, cluttered office to find a pen to write a grocery list. The desk was buried under mountains of yellowing paper, old ledgers, and parts catalogs. As I moved a stack of dusty blueprints, a heavy manila envelope slid off the edge and hit the floor. The clasp popped open, and a thick legal document spilled out onto the worn rug. I picked it up to put it back, but my eyes caught the bold, aggressive black letters at the top of the first page. I frowned and started reading. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. It was a contract from a notorious predatory lending company. It was designed to slowly, methodically drain the equity out of the workshop property, handing over small amounts of cash now in exchange for signing the deed of the land away the moment my grandfather died. But the most sickening part was not the contract itself. It was the bright yellow sticky note attached to the front page. It was written in Daphne's flawless, sweeping calligraphy. It read, "Dad, sign where highlighted and mail it back by Friday. Sutton's therapy bills are piling up, and her anxiety is getting worse. She needs the down payment for the new luxury SUV to feel safe driving on the highway again. Do not be stubborn. We need this cash. Daphne." My stomach violently turned. The sheer audacity made me physically nauseous. My grandfather was sitting on a gold mine of commercial property, but he was cash poor because his body was failing and he could no longer do the brutal, heavy labor required to restore grand pianos. And my parents, instead of helping him, instead of hiring an assistant or supporting him, were trying to force him into a predatory loan that would leave him homeless and penniless, just to fund Sutton's imaginary traumas and luxury lifestyle. They were bleeding him dry, exactly like they had bled me. I walked out to the workshop holding the papers in a white-knuckle grip. Gideon was sitting on a stool, slowly trying to clean the rust off a tuning pin. His breathing was labored. His hands shook. I held up the papers. "Were you actually going to sign this?" He stopped working. He looked at the envelope, and his broad shoulders slumped. A deep, agonizing shame crossed his weathered face. "Daphne calls every single day, Marin," he said softly. "She cries. She says Sutton is in crisis. She says I am being selfish holding onto this dirt. I do not have cash. I just have wood and wire. Sometimes it is easier to just sign the paper to make the phone stop ringing." I walked over to the heavy metal trash can in the corner of the shop. I ripped the reverse mortgage agreement into quarters, then into eighths. I dropped the shredded pieces into the sawdust and spat on them. I turned back to him. The scared 25-year-old girl who ran away and the night was dead. "The phone is going to stop ringing," I said fiercely, "because you are never giving them another dime. I am going to work the shop. I am going to rebuild this business. We are going to make our own cash, and we are going to lock them out forever." He looked at me for a long time. Then, a slow, dangerous smile crept across his face. He reached over to a peg on the wall and pulled down a pair of thick, cracked leatherwork gloves. They were stained with oil, varnish, and old blood. He tossed them to me. I caught them against my chest. "Put them on," he said. "When your hands bleed enough to fill them out, they will fit just fine. Grab a sanding block. We have a soundboard to strip." That was day one. The day I stopped waiting to be rescued and started building my own fortress. I did not know how to run a commercial restoration business. I barely knew a hammer shank from a damper pedal, but I knew how to work until my muscles failed. The next 3 years were a crucible of physical agony and financial terror. I poured every ounce of my rage, my grief, and my desperate need for survival into Gideon and Marin grand pianos. My hands were perpetually blistered, covered in chemical burns from heavy strippers, and sliced open by snapping steel strings. I woke up at 4 in the morning, managed the chaotic bookkeeping, ordered specialized supplies, and then spent 12 hours a day doing the brutal, back-breaking labor of lifting cast iron plates and steam-bending wood. We started small, fixing broken keys on cheap uprights, earning a few $100s here and there, just enough to keep the lights on and pay the property taxes so the bank would not take the land. And then I found Weston. Weston was a supplier of rare acoustic woods and custom steel wire. He was tall, quiet, had hands as scarred as mine, and a demeanor as calm as a deep lake. He started coming by the shop twice a week to drop off supplies. He never pushed. He never asked invasive questions. He just brought me hot black coffee when I was working late and quietly helped me lift the heavy iron frames when Gideon couldn't. He became my anchor. By my 3rd year, word had started to spread. People in the elite music circles were talking about the young woman at Gideon's shop who was doing museum-quality restoration work. The waiting list formed. We were finally turning a massive profit. Gideon stopped worrying about the bills and started smiling again. I hired 2 apprentices. Then, just as I was about to sign a lucrative $100,000 contract to restore a fleet of vintage Steinways for a national conservatory, the hammer fell. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The shop was humming with activity. I was negotiating the final terms of the conservatory contract on the phone when a white government truck pulled into the gravel lot. 2 agents from the Environmental Protection Agency stepped out, carrying clipboards and looking grim. They walked straight past the front desk and up to me. The lead agent did not smile. "Are you Marin? We received an anonymous tip with photographic evidence that this facility is illegally dumping toxic wood strippers, heavy varnishes, and chemical solvents directly into the groundwater behind your property. We are issuing an immediate stop work order pending a full soil and water investigation." My heart slammed against my ribs. A stop work order meant I could not touch a single piano. It meant the conservatory contract would evaporate instantly. It meant bankruptcy. I panicked. "That is impossible," I argued, my voice rising. "We use a certified disposal company for all our chemicals. We pay a premium for eco-friendly removal. I can show you the manifests right now." The agent shook his head. He gestured for me to follow him. He walked me around to the back of the main shed, near the tree line that sloped down toward the county reservoir. There, soaking into the dirt, killing the grass, was a massive, fresh puddle of black chemical sludge and toxic lacquer thinner. 3 empty, unmarked industrial jugs were tossed carelessly into the brush. I stared at the toxic mess in absolute horror. Someone had intentionally dumped it there to frame the shop. The EPA shut us down on the spot. For 3 days, I sat in the dark office, watching my scheduled clients drive away in frustration, watching my hard-earned bank account bleed out from the mandatory emergency environmental cleanup fees. I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of defeat pressing down on my chest. I thought I was cursed. I thought Daphne had finally won from afar. But I was not the scared girl crying in the sleet anymore. I was a business owner. I called Weston. I sat in my office, shaking with anger, and told him about the illegal dump. I told him it was a setup. Weston did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me it would be okay. He just pulled out his laptop and set it on my desk. "Marin," Weston said calmly, his voice a steady rumble. "The access road behind your shed connects directly to the county service road. The county put up motion sensor trail cameras last month to catch teenagers dumping old tires. I know the guy who runs the surveyor's office. Let me make a phone call." 24 hours later, Weston and I were sitting in the dark office, watching grainy, black and white security footage from the night before the EPA inspection. On the screen, a silver luxury sedan pulled onto the dirt road behind my shed at 2 in the morning. A woman got out. She popped the trunk, pulled out 3 massive plastic jugs, and poured the thick, toxic liquid directly into the soil. When the woman turned her face toward the camera lens to check her surroundings, my blood turned to ice. It was Aunt Veda, Daphne's younger sister. My mother's ultimate flying monkey and most loyal henchman. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. This was not a random act of vandalism. This was a targeted, calculated assassination of my livelihood. Daphne had figured out that I was succeeding. She realized I was not going to fail, crawl back home, and beg for forgiveness. So, she sent Veda to destroy my business, hoping the fines and the scandal would bankrupt me, force me to sell the land, and put the cash right into Daphne's pockets. They wanted me broken. They needed me dependent. I sat there, staring at the frozen frame of my aunt's guilty face. Weston put a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. "Do you want me to call the local police?" he asked quietly. I looked at the screen. A cold, terrifying calm settled over me. The kind of calm that comes right before a hurricane levels a city. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Give me a copy of that video on a flash drive. The local police will just give her a misdemeanor fine for trespassing. I want something much, much worse. I want to build an empire so high that when they look up at me, the sun blinds them." I took the video directly to the lead investigator at the EPA. I proved, unequivocally, that the dumping was a targeted act of sabotage by an estranged family member. The results were catastrophic for Veda. The stop work order on my shop was lifted immediately. The federal agency shifted all of the cleanup fees, plus massive, crippling environmental fines, directly onto Veda. The fines were so astronomical that Veda was forced to remortgage her house just to stay out of federal prison. I never said a single word to my mother about it. I did not call to gloat. I let Daphne watch from afar in agonizing silence as her master plan failed spectacularly and ruined her own sister's life in the process. I went back to the shop. I secured the conservatory contract. I finished restoring the vintage Steinways. We earned over $100,000 in 3 months. I used the money to build a new, state-of-the-art ventilation shed. I hired 3 more mechanics. I stopped surviving. I started conquering. And I prepared for the day they would inevitably come back for my blood. If you are enjoying this story of building an empire from the ashes of a toxic family, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. Now, let's get back to the revenge. Year 5 of my exile marked a turning point. If you had driven past Gideon and Marin grand pianos during that time, you would not have recognized the property. The leaning sheds were gone. In their place stood massive, temperature-controlled steel and brick buildings. The muddy gravel lot was fully paved. We had a beautiful showroom facing the main road with floor-to-ceiling glass windows. My name was featured in 2 national restoration trade magazines. I was 29 years old. My bank accounts were heavy, my business was thriving, and I had Weston standing steadfastly by my side. I had built an iron wall around my peace. But toxic families are insidious. Just when you think you have scrubbed them out of your life, they find a new crack to seep through. The crack opened on a random Thursday in late October. My cell phone rang with an unknown local number. I answered it without thinking, my mind preoccupied with a shipping manifest. It was Daphne. Her voice dripped with a sugary, unnatural warmth that immediately made the hair on my arms stand up. "Marin, darling, it is Mom. Please do not hang up," she cooed. "We have missed you so much. We have been reading all about your little piano business in the papers. We are just bursting with pride. We really are." I stood in the middle of my gleaming showroom, holding a clipboard, feeling my jaw lock tight. 5 years of unbroken silence. 5 years of letting me bleed, build, and survive entirely alone. And now, suddenly, she was bursting with pride. I kept my voice deadpan. "What do you want, Daphne?" She feigned a sharp gasp of hurt. "I want to see my daughter. Your father and I want to celebrate your success. We want to take you out to dinner in the city. Just the 3 of us. No drama, just a family reconnecting. Please, Marin, give us a chance to show you we have grown." I should have said no. I knew better. But there is a pathetic, broken sliver inside every scapegoat child that still desperately wants to believe the lie. That maybe, just maybe, their parents have finally woken up. That maybe the massive success I built had finally earned me a real seat at the table. I agreed to meet them on Saturday night at an upscale, wildly expensive Italian restaurant downtown. I wore a tailored, dark charcoal suit. I drove my own luxury truck. I walked into the restaurant feeling like the CEO I was. But the moment I saw Daphne and Alistair sitting in a plush leather booth, my chest tightened with the old, familiar anxiety. They stood up. They hugged me. They ordered expensive wine. For the first 45 minutes, it was surreal. They asked about the shop. They complimented my clothes. Alistair even smiled and told a joke. It felt like a flawless simulation of a loving family. Then the waiter cleared the dinner plates and the simulation crashed violently. Daphne reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a thick manila folder and slid it across the white tablecloth, right past the glowing centerpiece candle. She smiled. It was a sharp, hungry, predatory smile. "Marin, sweetheart," Daphne purred, "since your little piano project is doing so incredibly well, we knew you would be thrilled to help your sister out." I stared at the folder. The illusion evaporated instantly, leaving behind a cold, brutal reality. I did not touch the paper. "What is this?" Daphne leaned in, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Sutton has finally found her true passion. She is launching a luxury organic cosmetic line. It is going to be massive. But the bank is being ridiculous about her lack of credit history. She needs a commercial loan for $200,000 to secure the manufacturing warehouse." Alistair finally spoke up, refusing to meet my eyes, staring at his empty wine glass. "We need a guarantor, Marin. Someone with substantial business assets to co-sign the loan. Your shop is assessed at a high value now. You just need to sign this paper putting the land up as collateral. It is just a formality. Sutton will pay every cent back." I sat frozen in the booth. The sheer, staggering audacity of it knocked the breath straight out of my lungs. They did not invite me here to celebrate my success. They invited me here to harvest it. They wanted me to risk the empire I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. They wanted me to put a lien on my grandfather's land so Sutton could play businesswoman with lip gloss. They wanted to tie a $200,000 noose around my neck and hand the rope to a sister who had never worked a hard day in her miserable life. Daphne pushed a silver pen across the table. "We are family, Marin. This is what families do. They lift each other up. And frankly, after everything we did raising you, feeding you, putting a roof over your head, it is the very least you can do to pay us back." I looked at the silver pen. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the tall glass of ice water sitting next to my plate. I did not yell. I did not cry. The scared 25-year-old girl who canceled her own birthday was long dead. The woman sitting in the booth was forged in sawdust, steel wire, and survival. I picked up the glass of ice water. I maintained unbroken, lethal eye contact with my mother. And with a casual, fluid flick of my wrist, I tossed the entire glass of water and heavy ice cubes directly across the table. The freezing water hit Daphne square in the chest, soaking her silk blouse, dripping down her shocked, perfectly made-up face and instantly ruining the loan documents scattered on the table. Daphne shrieked. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Diners at nearby tables turned to stare. Alistair jumped up, grabbing cloth napkins in a frantic panic. Daphne gasped for air, her face turning a violent shade of purple. "You," she sputtered, her voice trembling with rage. "You ungrateful, psychotic little brat. What is wrong with you?" I stood up slowly. I buttoned my suit jacket. I looked down at her dripping, pathetic form. "What is wrong with me is that I finally learned my worth," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet dining room. "You do not want a daughter. You want an ATM. You want to bet my grandfather's legacy on Sutton's makeup hobby? Go to hell, Daphne. If you or Sutton ever contact me again, I will have you arrested for harassment." I threw a $100 bill onto the soggy, ruined loan documents to cover my stake, turned on my heel, and walked out of the restaurant. My spine was perfectly straight. My hands were entirely steady. I drove the long hours back to the lake with the windows rolled down, letting the freezing night air roar through the cabin, laughing until hot tears streamed down my face. It was the most liberating moment of my entire existence. I had severed the cord. I had one. Or so I thought. I assumed they would retreat to their miserable lives. But what happens when the people who threw you away decide they are willing to play the long game to steal the empire you built? My life at Gideon and Marin Grand Pianos moved into a golden era. I was not just scraping by anymore. I was a prominent figure in the restoration industry. The shop was booked solid for years. The crew I hired was fiercely loyal and Weston, and I had built a quiet, solid, beautiful life together. But the universe has a very funny way of delivering karma, and my delivery arrived in the form of a 70-year-old billionaire real estate mogul named Phaedra. Phaedra was a sheer force of nature. She drove vintage convertibles, wore massive emerald rings on her sun-spotted hands, and collected rare classical instruments the way other wealthy people collected luxury cars. She had heard about my restoration work and decided to bring her entire fleet of 3 extremely rare antique grand pianos to my shop for a full, multi-million-dollar overhaul. But there was a catch, a beautiful, hilarious, poetic catch. Phaedra happened to be the reigning queen of the high society country club back in my hometown. She was the exact woman my mother Daphne had spent the last 20 years desperately trying to impress, emulate, and dethrone. Daphne obsessed over Phaedra. She copied Phaedra's landscaping, bought cheap knockoff versions of Phaedra's designer dresses, and constantly tried to bribe her way into Phaedra's exclusive charity committees, only to be politely but firmly ignored. I did not know any of this when I took the contract. I just knew Phaedra was a demanding but fair client who paid her massive invoices the exact same day they were issued. Over the course of a year, working closely on the instruments, Phaedra and I actually became quite close. She respected my brutal work ethic. She liked that I did not back down or grovel when she suggested design changes that would compromise the historical integrity of her pianos. I told her no, and she respected me deeply for it. When the restoration of her prized flagship Steinway was finally complete, Phaedra was so utterly thrilled that she invited a premier luxury lifestyle magazine to do a massive feature on the instrument. The magazine sent a professional photographer to my yard. We spent 2 days shooting the gleaming mahogany, the custom ivory keys, and the immaculate gold-painted iron plates. A month later, the magazine hit the stands. It was a glossy 10-page spread. But Phaedra had done something I did not expect at all. She did not just talk about the piano. She spent half the article talking about me. There was a full-page photo of me standing in the workshop, wearing my grandfather's worn leather work gloves, looking out over the floor. Next to the photo was a quote from Phaedra, printed in huge, bold letters. It read, "Marin is a true visionary. In a world full of shallow, status-obsessed social climbers desperate for attention, Marin possesses a rare, authentic brilliance. She is a self-made talent that the superficial, pathetic circles of our state could never possibly comprehend or appreciate." It was a glowing, career-defining endorsement. It was also a direct, public, devastating slap in the face to the exact social circle my mother worshipped. 2 days after the magazine was published, my phone practically vibrated off the desk in my office. It was a rapid-fire string of text messages from an unknown number. I had blocked Daphne years ago, but toxic parents always find a way. She had bought a cheap prepaid phone just to get her venom through to me. The messages came in like bullets. "How dare you? You manipulative little snake. You deliberately sought out Phaedra just to humiliate me. You know exactly what that woman thinks of our family. You fed her lies about us, did you not? You sat in your dirty little shop and played the victim so she would put you in her magazine and insult me. You are an ungrateful, spiteful child. You are an embarrassment to this family. Do not think you have won anything." I sat at my desk, sipping my morning coffee, reading the texts. I did not feel angry. I did not feel triggered or hurt. I just felt a profound, deep sense of amusement. The irony was exquisite. The daughter she had discarded, the child she deemed worthless and forced to walk home in the sleet, was now the celebrated prodigy of the woman she idolized the most. I did not reply. I deleted the messages, tossed the prepaid number onto my block list, and went back out to the shop floor. I thought her rage was just the sting of a wounded ego. I thought it was over. I had no idea that her jealousy was about to mutate into a calculated, predatory plan to steal my entire livelihood right out from under me. Year 7 of my exile brought the coldest winter our state had seen in a decade. The lake near the shop froze solid, and the wind was sharp enough to cut exposed skin. Inside the main shed, however, the massive industrial heaters hummed, keeping the air warm and smelling of fresh cedar and hot glue. I was in the office going over payroll when my cell phone chimed. It was a message from my cousin, Tamsin. Tamsin was the only person from my extended family who had never bought into Daphne's toxic narrative. She was the one who had secretly kept in touch with me after I left. Her message contained only 4 words: "You need to see this." Attached below the text was a screenshot. It was an image captured from a private family group chat. The chat was titled "The Real Family." I zoomed in on the image. The conversation was between Daphne, Alistair, Sutton, and Aunt Veda. As I read the words on the screen, the warm air in the office suddenly felt freezing cold. Daphne had written, "The meeting went perfectly today. The commercial real estate broker confirmed the property is easily worth $3 million, maybe more with the updated facilities that little brat built. I got him to sign a preliminary intent to buy." Alistair had replied, "Are you sure we can legally sell it right away? What if the old man drags it out?" Daphne fired back, "He is 77 and his heart is failing. The doctor said he does not have long. The second he flatlines, the property defaults to me as his only child. He has no other will. We kick Marin out, sell the dirt to the broker, and split the $3 million. The broker even gave me $50,000 in cash today as a good faith deposit to lock in his priority position." Then came Sutton's message. She had added 3 laughing emojis. She wrote, "Make sure you give her a strict 30 days notice before the eviction. I do not want her claiming squatters' rights. Oh, and see if the broker will let me keep one of those expensive vintage pianos for my new living room. LOL." I sat in my office chair and read the screenshot 5 times. My vision blurred with pure, unadulterated fury. My own mother had already collected a $50,000 cash bribe from a dirty real estate broker to sell my grandfather's land out from under us. They were hovering like vultures, literally counting down the days until my grandfather died so they could swoop in, render me homeless, destroy my 9-year business, and walk away with $3 million. They had planned it all in cold blood. The betrayal was so deep, so fundamentally evil, that it completely bypassed my emotions and went straight to my survival instincts. I printed the screenshot. I folded the paper, put it in my heavy jacket pocket, and walked up the snowy path to the main residential cabin. Grandpa Gideon was sitting in his worn armchair by the fireplace, reading a book. His breathing was shallow. He had aged significantly over the last few years, his body finally giving in to decades of hard labor. I poured us both a cup of black coffee, sat on the stone hearth across from him, and handed him the piece of paper. "Tamsin sent this to me 10 minutes ago," I said quietly. "You need to read it." He put on his reading glasses. I watched his tired eyes scan the printed messages. I expected him to be furious. I expected him to yell, or cry, or curse his daughter's name. Instead, he did something that chilled me to the bone. He chuckled. It was a dry, raspy, humorless sound. He took off his glasses, folded the paper neatly in half, and set it on the coffee table. He looked at me with eyes that were terrifying in their clarity. "Well," Gideon rasped, "Daphne always did like counting chickens before they hatched. Hand me my cane, Marin." I helped him stand. We walked slowly down the short hallway to his bedroom. He went straight to the heavy steel safe bolted to the floor in his closet. He spun the dial, pulled the heavy door open, and reached inside. He pulled out a thick manila folder and handed it to me. "Open it," he commanded. I opened the flap. Inside was a stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. I pulled out the top document. It was a property deed. At the bottom right corner was a bright red, embossed seal from the county clerk's office. I started reading the legal jargon, my eyes scanning the dense text until I hit the critical paragraph. The document stated that Gideon had irrevocably transferred full, unencumbered ownership of the entire commercial property all buildings and all business assets associated with the shop to one Marin. I looked at the date next to the red seal. It was dated exactly 3 years ago, right after the incident with Aunt Veda dumping the chemicals. My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to shake violently. "Grandpa, what is this? When did you do this?" He sat down on the edge of his bed, leaning heavily on his cane. "I did it the week after Daphne sent Veda to destroy your shop," he said softly. "I knew then that they were never, ever going to stop trying to break you. And I knew that when I died, Daphne would use the probate courts to tie you up in legal fees until you starved. So, I had Orson draw up the papers. I went down to the county office myself. I signed it all over. I paid the massive transfer taxes out of my own savings. It is airtight, Marin. The land is not mine. It is yours. It has been yours for over 1,000 days." I fell to my knees in front of him. I pressed my face into his rough flannel-coated knee and sobbed. I sobbed for the 12-year-old girl left in the sleet. I sobbed for the 25-year-old girl who canceled her own birthday. And I sobbed because, for the first time in my entire life, someone had chosen me. Someone had put an iron shield around me that my mother could never break. He stroked my hair with a trembling hand. "Do not cry for them, kid. Let them plan. Let Daphne take the dirty broker's money. Let them build their little imaginary castle in the sky. Because the higher they build it, the harder they are going to hit the concrete when you finally knock it down." I wiped my face. I stood up. I looked at the red seal on the deed. And I made a silent, unbreakable promise to the man who saved my life. I was not just going to knock their castle down. I was going to obliterate it. But how far would you let your enemies walk into a trap before you pull the lever? Year 9 brought the end of an era. The heart condition that had been slowly wearing Grandpa Gideon down finally took its ultimate toll. By early spring, he was no longer able to leave his bed. I cut my client load in half. For 6 weeks, my entire world shrank to the size of his front room. Weston moved in with me permanently, taking over the night shifts so I could sleep. My mechanic stopped by every afternoon to tell him stories. It was a hard time, but it was filled with genuine love. Then he passed away quietly in his sleep. And the vultures immediately smelled death. Which brings us back to the cemetery. Back to the cold wind, the open grave, and the crisp white envelope my mother shoved into my chest. They had not visited or called in years, but they made sure to be physically present to stake their claim. Daphne, playing the grieving widow of a daughter. Sutton, pretending to be overcome with sorrow. Alistair, trailing behind them like a beaten dog. "You have 30 days to pack up your junk and vacate the premises," Daphne had said, her voice dripping with venom. "Do not make this difficult." She thought she held every single card in the deck. She thought the $50,000 bribe she took was the start of her new, wealthy life. She thought I was cornered. I looked at her perfectly manicured face. I felt the heavy weight of the knowledge burning in my mind. I thought about the deed locked in my safe. I gave her that slow, pleasant smile, the kind of smile a spider gives a fly that just landed on the web. "Tomorrow," I said smoothly, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet cemetery. "Tomorrow at 11 in the morning sounds perfect, Daphne. Please, bring everyone you need. Bring your lawyer. Bring your real estate broker. I will make sure the main yard is open, and I will have everyone waiting for you. Let us settle this once and for all." Daphne looked slightly confused by my total lack of resistance, but her overwhelming greed quickly overrode her suspicion. She smirked triumphantly. "Good," she said haughtily. "I am glad you are finally acting like the strong one we raised you to be." She turned and walked away, her high heels sinking slightly into the grass. Sutton shot me a look of pure disgust before following her. I watched them leave. I got into my truck. I pulled out my phone and made 3 very specific phone calls. The first was to Orson, my grandfather's real attorney. The second was to Weston. And the third was to a corporate contact in the city. I was not just going to stop her. I was going to construct a massive public stage, turn a blinding spotlight on her, and let her destroy herself in front of an audience. Saturday morning arrived with bright, harsh sunlight reflecting off the frost on the ground. The shop yard looked magnificent. The massive bay doors of the main sheds were rolled up, revealing half a dozen multi-million-dollar pianos in various stages of flawless restoration. The paved lot was swept clean. I did not prepare a private room for this meeting. I set up a long, heavy wooden table right in the middle of the main courtyard, under the open sky. I brewed a large urn of coffee. By 10:30, my audience began to arrive. I had invited 30 people to what I called an informal memorial brunch for my grandfather. My entire crew was there. Tamsin was there. Several of my wealthiest, most influential clients were there, including Phaedra, who sat in a folding chair, wearing a full fur coat and sipping black coffee, looking highly entertained. Weston stood directly behind my right shoulder, his arms crossed over his chest, looking like an immovable stone wall. And sitting quietly at the far end of the table, blending in perfectly, was Orson, the real estate attorney who had drafted the deed 3 years ago. At exactly 11 o'clock, the sound of crunching gravel echoed through the yard. A massive black luxury SUV pulled through the front gates. The villains had arrived. Daphne stepped out first, wearing a sharp, aggressive business suit. Alistair scurried out behind her, holding a briefcase. Sutton emerged, complaining loudly about the cold wind messing up her hair. Then the hired guns stepped out. The first was a slick, overly tan man in a cheap suit carrying a leather portfolio. This was Cale, the dirty broker who had paid Daphne the $50,000 bribe. The second man was an older, nervous-looking fellow clutching a legal pad. This was clearly a fake lawyer Daphne had hired to legitimize her coup. Daphne walked toward the courtyard, her eyes scanning the crowd. She looked surprised to see so many people, but I watched her quickly process the situation and decide to use it to her advantage. She thought this was an audience gathered to witness her triumph. She thought she was about to look like a benevolent queen showing mercy to her peasant daughter. She walked to the head of the wooden table. She did not offer me a greeting. She simply clinked a silver spoon against a coffee mug to demand everyone's attention. The yard went dead silent. Daphne projected her voice, putting on her best, most tragic theatrical tone. Thank you all for being here to honor my father. As his only child and the sole executive of his legacy, this is a very heavy burden for me. But my father and I had many long talks before he passed. He wanted this property to reach its highest potential. Therefore, it is with a heavy heart that I must announce that this shop and the surrounding acreage are officially being liquidated and sold. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mechanics exchanged confused, angry looks. Phaedra raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. I just stood there, my hands resting lightly on the table, my face completely blank. Daphne waved a hand toward her nervous lawyer. My attorney here has the updated will, which my father signed in his final days, granting me total legal authority to expedite this sale. We already have a premium buyer lined up. She turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were cruel and merciless. Marin, my buyer has agreed to let you take your personal toolboxes when you leave. You have until the end of the month to clear your junk out. She folded her arms and smiled. Cale the broker smirked. Sutton pulled out her phone and started recording a video, hoping to capture my emotional breakdown for her social media feed. The silence in the courtyard was thick enough to choke on. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for the explosion. I picked up my coffee mug. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I set the mug down. I looked Daphne directly in the eye, and my voice rang out across the courtyard, calm, clear, and absolutely lethal. That was a beautiful speech, Daphne, I said. There is only one minor technical problem with your plan. Daphne scoffed, rolling her eyes. Do not embarrass yourself, Marin. There are no problems. The will is signed. The sale is happening. You have no legal standing here. I smiled. The spiderweb snapped shut. Actually, Daphne, you cannot sell the property because you cannot sell something you do not own, I said softly. Orson, would you mind bringing everyone up to speed? The quiet, unassuming man sitting at the end of the table stood up. Orson unbuttoned his overcoat, adjusted his glasses, and pulled a heavy manila folder from his leather satchel. He walked calmly to the center of the table. Daphne frowned, her arrogant smile faltering for the very first time. Who the hell are you? Orson spoke with the measured, terrifying authority of a man who knows the law inside and out. My name is Orson. I was Gideon's personal attorney for the last 25 years. And I am here to inform you that the document you are holding is entirely worthless. Daphne's face flushed a violent red. She slammed her hand on the table. You are lying. My father signed this, leaving everything to me. Orson opened his folder. He pulled out the heavy watermark document with the bright red county seal. He laid it flat on the wooden table. A will only dictates the distribution of assets owned by the deceased at the time of death, Orson explained calmly. Gideon did not own this property when he died. Exactly 3 years and 2 months ago, Gideon executed an irrevocable deed transfer. He legally gifted the entirety of the estate and all business assets to his granddaughter, Marin. The taxes were paid. The deed was recorded. This land has been the sole, exclusive property of Marin for over 1,000 days. There is no estate to probate. There is nothing for you to inherit. And there is nothing for you to sell. I watched the exact second Daphne's reality shattered. It was an instant, catastrophic collapse. All the blood drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, chalky white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the red seal on the deed as if it were a venomous snake. Her fake lawyer leaned over, looked at the county stamp on the deed, and immediately took 3 massive steps backward, physically distancing himself from Daphne. He knew a bulletproof legal document when he saw one, and he knew she had just dragged him into a massive liability. Alistair gasped, grabbing the edge of the table to stay upright. Sutton stopped recording her video. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered loudly onto the pavement. Daphne started hyperventilating. She pointed a trembling finger at me. This is fraud. You manipulated a dying old man. I will sue you. I will drag you through the courts until you are bankrupt. Orson adjusted his glasses. You are welcome to try, ma'am. But I have sworn affidavits from 2 doctors and a notary public attesting to Gideon's perfect mental capacity on the day he signed it. If you file a frivolous lawsuit, we will countersue for legal fees and file a formal complaint for attempting to execute a fraudulent sale. Daphne whipped her head around, looking frantically at her hired broker. Do something. You gave me $50,000. Tell them we have a binding contract. Cale let out a heavy sigh. He reached up and slowly took off his expensive sunglasses. He looked at Daphne with an expression of pure pity. I am afraid I cannot do that, Daphne, Cale said. Why not? She shrieked. Cale turned his body away from her. He looked at me, gave a highly respectful nod, and said, because Daphne, my brokerage firm, was acquired 6 months ago by a commercial holding group based out of the city. The majority shareholder and CEO of that holding group is Marin. You did not take a $50,000 deposit from an independent buyer. You took a deposit from a subsidiary company owned by your own daughter. You literally tried to sell Marin's land to Marin's own employee. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. Phaedra let out a loud, delighted bark of laughter that cracked like a whip across the yard. Daphne's eyes rolled back in her head. The sheer, overwhelming humiliation of being outplayed on such a massive, multi-layered scale physically broke her. She let out a guttural scream of pure rage. She lunged forward, trying to grab the deed off the table. Weston stepped forward instantly. He did not hit her. He just placed his massive frame between Daphne and the table, an immovable wall of protective fury. Seeing that violence was impossible, Sutton immediately resorted to the only tactic she knew, the Golden Child playbook. She let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutched her chest, and threw herself backward onto the hard pavement, pretending to have a massive panic attack. She thrashed her legs, waiting for the crowd to rush to her aid. But no one moved. 30 people stood in a circle around her, staring down at her in absolute, disgusted silence. The magic spell was broken. Here in the real world, no one cared about her fake tears. Sutton lay on the cold pavement, looking around frantically, realizing for the first time in her life that she was entirely powerless. Alistair stepped away from his wife. His eyes were welling with tears. He took a step toward me, reaching out a trembling hand. Marin, he whispered. Oh my God, Marin, please. I am so sorry. I did not know. Let me explain. I am your father. I looked at the man who had let me walk home in the sleet. The man who had let my mother hijack my birthday. I raised one hand, palm out, stopping him dead in his tracks. No, I said coldly. You are not my father. You are just a coward who married a thief. I stepped around the wooden table. The anger had fully left my body, replaced by a profound, chilling emptiness. I looked at Daphne, who was leaning heavily against the SUV, gasping for air. My grandfather gave you one final test, I said. He let you believe you had won just to see if you would show a single ounce of decency. You failed. Now you owe my holding company $50,000 for breaching a fraudulent contract. I suggest you wire the funds by Monday morning, or my corporate attorneys will place a lien on your personal home. Daphne stared at me with pure hatred, but she did not say a word. The fight was beaten out of her. I pointed toward the heavy iron gates at the entrance of the property. Pick your daughter up off the floor. Get in your car and never set foot on my property again. Alistair reached down and hauled Sutton up by her arm. She was covered in gravel dust, her designer clothes ruined. Daphne crawled into the passenger seat of the SUV. Alistair got behind the wheel. The fake lawyer and Cale ran to their own vehicles, desperate to escape the blast radius. The SUV started up. Alistair put it in reverse, turned clumsily, and drove toward the exit. I walked behind them. I followed the SUV all the way down the long driveway. When the back bumper cleared the property line, I grabbed the heavy iron gates. I pulled them shut. The latch engaged with a loud, echoing metallic clang. I slid the heavy steel padlock into place and turned the key. I stood at the fence and watched the black SUV disappear down the highway until it vanished. The toxic cord was severed. The poison was gone. That was 1 year ago. Since that day, our shop has expanded even further. Weston and I got married under a canopy of oak trees right there in the main courtyard. Tamsin was my maid of honor. There were no fake panic attacks. There was no drama. It was just joy. I never received the $50,000 from Daphne. Instead, Tamsin told me that Daphne had to quietly sell her prized country club membership to cover the corporate fines and avoid a public lawsuit. Phaedra personally voted to approve the sale of her membership, ensuring Daphne was officially exiled from the high society she loved more than her own children. Sutton is currently working as a cashier at a discount clothing store, constantly complaining to anyone who will listen that she was cheated out of her destiny. And then there is Alistair. My father calls my office phone line once a month. He leaves long, rambling voicemails. He cries. He talks about how Daphne's anger has made their house a living hell, and how he just wants to sit down and have a cup of coffee with his successful daughter. He begs for forgiveness. I never call him back. I listen to the first 10 seconds of the voicemail, just long enough to hear the regret in his voice, and then I hit the delete button. Some people tell me I should take pity on him. They say he was a victim of Daphne's abuse too. But I look at the permanent calluses on my hands. I look at the heavy iron gates he allowed me to be locked behind when I was just a child asking for a sliver of love. And I realize that forgiveness is a gift you give to people who actually try to protect you, not to the people who stood by and watched you bleed. So I leave the gates locked. I let the silence be my final answer. What do you think? Am I being too cruel by refusing to answer my father's desperate calls for forgiveness? Or is my silence exactly the justice a lifetime of cowardice deserves? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to build your own table because your family refused to give you a seat, remember that you are not alone and your strength is your ultimate weapon. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is massive, unstoppable success. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.